Thanks, Adele. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here with us. We are dealing with a topic today on how to manage grief and trauma in the South African workplace. We've had such a crazy almost 2 years pretty much with the rise of the pandemic and all of the things that has brought about. There's been a lot of loss and a lot of changes, economic changes, workplace changes, working remotely. I mean, there's been huge amounts of change. On top of that, there's been rioting, it's just been a crazy time. And the reality is that as much as we like to think that that's out there and our workplace just continues, it doesn't. You know, these things leak into our workplace and they actually need to be addressed because people are holistic, you know, so we need to look at those things holistically. One of the comments we had on social media when we were sharing this information was about, you know, psychological safety and how great it was to have a forum to discuss what that psychological safety looks like in the workplace. And this is pretty much what it is. You know, today we're going to be talking about how you make that safe space for your people and how you just deal with the issues that are very pertinent in their life. So without any more talking from me, you can tell that it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Annale Krogh. She's going to switch her camera on now so we can see her face. Welcome, it's good to have you with us. Okay, so a little bit about Annale. She's been a therapist for 33 years, and of that time, she's been doing grief counseling for 25 years. Annale initially qualified as a psychologist from the University of Pretoria, but she went on to do a postmaster's in psychoneuropathology at the University of Johannesburg. Annale also did an international expert grief course in 2004 through a Canadian university, and she's been an expert guest on the television show Carte Blanche and has also participated in many radio talk shows. Presently, Annale is doing these webinars for companies on grief and dealing with the pandemic, and it's been much needed during this time. She's had consistent positive feedback from the companies that she's worked with on the effectiveness and the helpfulness of these talks. So we're really excited, Annale, to have you sharing with us today. And, you know, without any further ado, I'm going to switch off my camera and hand over to you.
Thank you, Bridget. Good morning, everybody. It is always a privilege for me when I'm doing these type webinars because, you know, I think healing is like one candle that lights two and two lights four, and we are sitting with such a crisis in our country at the moment, working with the loss and trauma that happens all the time. I think the figures of our colleagues, friends, and family dying is just so horrific. So I think if we can speak about grief and speak a little bit about the concept of grief, how to deal with grief, and then at the end that I can focus on managers and how managers can support staff and how we can be effective in the management of this pandemic that has just been so sad and like a tsunami all over the world. So the heading of my chapter would be, I would speak about the concept of grief, how to support in grief, the different stages of grief, and the concept of redefining yourself after being exposed to grief and redefining your life. So the first thing that I want to say is that the only way to live without grief is to live without love. Because only then do you, if you lose somebody or somebody close to you, family member, colleague, friend, parent, it is such a painful thing, and it is so painful because there is love. And, you know, grief is a stranger because there's no predecessor to that. And he's a stranger, he walks into your life, and then one day he sits in every dream, in every night that you wake up. He sits in your tummy, he makes you nauseous, he makes you lonely. And then suddenly the stranger's in your life and he becomes so familiar in every day and every breath that you take. And it's unfamiliar territory because we don't know what grief is unless you have been exposed to grief. Now, grief very often has accompanying emotions. Accompanying emotion is anger, depression, fear, anxiety, and I think very strong feelings of helplessness, because it doesn't matter what you do, it's so difficult to reprogram your heart not to feel that pain and not to be in that situation where you sometimes just can't breathe because of pain. And I think the fear that goes together with grief has got to do with a fear that I'm not going to be okay, and a fear that how will I ever live without this person, and how will my life ever be the same? So that is the thing of redefining yourself and embracing that in such an incredibly difficult journey, because grief is a life-changing event. It's never the same after that. And I think that's what's making people anxious. It's making people very fearful because of the unpredictability of this uncharted territory. And then after the grief situation or the incident where a person died, we are exposed to such a difficult thing, which means all the first birthday, the first Christmas, the first Mother's Day, all those sentimental type days. And then suddenly celebrations needs to be different, if at all. And that because we are sentimental, I mean, our lives is defined through dates and times, isn't it? So much so in a grief situation, where we then have to celebrate somebody's birthday without that person being there and that person having passed away. So it's all to do with self-talk. So the self-talk is, I'm never going to get over that. And the repattern or the reframing of that would be, it will be okay in time. So one step at a time. I also think that grief plunges us in a existential questioning. And existential questioning is that where we start to consider our own mortality, and we start to consider the purpose of our own life, and we start to consider many things that we can say. So many things are if you're confronted with death, so many other things are just irrelevant, and sometimes even your work becomes irrelevant when you sit with such an overwhelming pain that tends to take your breath away. And interesting thing about grief that I find in grief counseling that I've been doing through all the years is that very often after the death of somebody, the accompanying emotion is guilt, where people feel, I should have done more, I should have said I love you more. Maybe if I took my family member to a better hospital, maybe that would have changed it. And this type self-talk and this type of guilt, I think guilt is a wasted emotion, because you need that energy to heal and to become yourself again, because there's still other people that you love and that you invest your energy into. And if we go into the what ifs, I think it's self-torture, and in my opinion, it is sore enough, rather than being entrapped in the guilt situation. I believe that the day that we are born, that same day, written into the rhythm of the universe, is the day that we're supposed to die. So whatever we could have done differently, I don't believe it. I believe it unfolds exactly how it should. In relation to COVID specifically, I think COVID is a very, very lonely illness, apart from the time before somebody dies. So grief is lonely in itself, because nobody understands. I don't think if you've ever experienced the depth of grief, do you know what it is. So, and in COVID specifically, so many people in the practice say to me that it was so painful. I couldn't see my loved one in the last 2 weeks. I don't have access to that because of the contagious nature of the virus. So it is lonely. Very often there's blame. A strange question for me is always that if somebody is testing positive for COVID, that the very next person would ask them, "Oh, where did you get it?" It's like that 5 days of that clever little virus where he waits around the corner to infect. So yeah, very often there's blame, or after after a child went to a party or exposed himself, come back, parents sick or grandparents sick, that there's very often blame in this, which is just sad, because I think it's a worldwide pandemic. Never did we think when this thing started in Wuhan that it is going to become so part of our everyday life. And I think that when it was announced, I think 22 March last year, that we're going to lock down for 2 weeks, did we ever even think that 18 months later that we still locked down, and it's even more intense than ever what we ever would have been able to predict. So if I can talk about support, so I'm talking about you supporting somebody close to you, or even somebody at work, manager supporting somebody who's been exposed to grief. And remember, I said it's a lonely journey because people don't understand, and also the nature of the relationship of the person who died influence how that affects that people and a person, and how that people heal. So support, number one, I would say that we should acknowledge without fear. People are fearful to speak about death. So when I've lost somebody close and I'm heartbroken, and you walk in the passage of the office, people tend to avoid because they don't know what to say. And it's true, we don't know what to say. And actually, it's not about what you say, but it's about presence, and it's maybe just about what you listen to, and that you show your level of compassion and support. Very often, I think people need some practical assistance. Is there anything that I can do? Can I drop the children at school? I always think that sending flowers after a grief situation, I think it's much better maybe just to send 2 already prepared meals, just to help in small things. Take the dog for a walk, take the children out a little bit, take them for ice cream somewhere that parents can just get a little bit of a break and access emotions that doesn't have to be guarded emotions, that can just be emotion, and that type release. Because I think grief is not something that can remain internally. It is a release that you have to do. That's why it's good to cry. Interesting thing, in the practice when we do grief counseling and somebody is very sad, we don't comfort in that, because people they must be allowed to express that emotion and to cry if they need to. Because I think people feel that if they cry with you and you comfort and say, oh, don't cry, that they must honor you or serve you by not crying, or by now feeling better or not doing that. That's so wrong, because it's a natural thing. That's why we have the ability to cry. And they even say that the chemical composition of tears are different than tears that will come out of my eyes if I laugh, for example, or if there's a little irritation in one's eyes. So it's a very good thing to cry and to relieve that. And I also think that you must understand that everybody's grief is a different journey. It depends on their personality. Psychology says that how people heal post-trauma is very often indicative of their emotional or their mental state before trauma. So there's no charted journey, and there's no defined time for that to happen. It is somebody's own journey, and all we can do is be present with mindfulness and with compassion in that situation. And then I think people need to talk, and they need to debrief. That's why it's an important thing to ask, but what happened, and what was that date, and when could you go back to the hospital, and what did the doctor say? If we speak specifically about grief, it's any situation that people can talk about, but what happened and what was their own journey that brought them there. And sometimes just to sit in silence, to listen, because they don't need the comfort necessarily. I think they need the presence, and they need the mindfulness. And sometimes you can just walk with somebody in silence and give your time. They say giving time is giving love. And maybe the only thing to say would be something like, sure, this must be terrible for you, or I can think that you are very upset. It's like a reflective technique, and just reflect some of that emotions. It's strange because it's a difficult question. If I have lost somebody close to my heart or my partner. I always like the word partner because partner means part of me. So if I've lost somebody and somebody says, how are you? I mean, how are you answering that question? Do I say, I'm terrible, I feel I'm dying? Or do I say, no, I'm good, but actually I'm not? So it's a difficult thing to say, how are you? So rather something like thinking of you. I know it's very difficult. Let me know if there's absolutely anything that I can do, because people in a grief situation don't even necessarily know what it is that people can do for them. So that use your own initiative. Like I said, send a meal, take the children off their hands a little bit, help with transport. So if we can look at the process itself. So we need to understand the process, that there's no right or wrong. It's a very unpredictable process, and healing is not linear. So it's better and then not, better and then not. So on the Tuesday I can feel much better and more centered, but the Wednesday I feel terrible again. And that we grant that and embrace that, because that is how it is. That is how people heal. Sometimes you have a little bit of freedom to breathe, where you feel there's not a cage around your heart. Other times it is just terrible. And I don't think that we should take people's grief personally, meaning that they withdraw from you, or that they give you a short answer, or that they feel that they don't want to tell you really how they are, because if they really tell you how they are, that will upset you. So then they keep that for themselves. And grief is lonely, because people don't understand the depth of that pain unless you have felt that pain. I believe that completely. Only then do you understand the depth of that pain. And it impacts differently on people. So I also think that we should be cautious when we deal with somebody who has just been exposed to a grief situation, of memory triggers for them. If it's something like, let's say a child has just died, and then we're in the office and I'm talking excitingly about my child's birthday party this weekend, and we've arranged a jumping castle. Little things can be quite a memory trigger. So for me, it's just about mindfulness and mindful management regarding how you give your support and how you show your compassion in that regard. Psychology says that the most difficult thing for one person is to think himself into the position of another. I think it's right. I think that is correct. So, but you try to do that just to be present, and then that total focus must actually be on them, not on you, on what they experience, on what they are going through. And sometimes we are brave to support somebody that is in a grief situation, because it creates fear in ourselves. We can say, sure, what if it happens to me, or I won't be able to deal with it. With a child dying, for example, very often people say, I can't even speak to my friend about her child who has died, because if I think about my own child dying, my entire existence just becomes fragmented. So a quick little thing about what to say and what not to say. So I said it's mostly listening, not really saying. It is important to be mindful about what we call secondary wounding. So the wound is very often the loss of the person. The secondary wound is the circumstances that occurs around it. Let's go back to COVID, and so my husband died in the COVID situation, and that somebody would say, sure, I'm sure you wish that you took him to a better hospital, which would make it 10 times worse. Or a child died in a car accident while I was driving, and that somebody will say to me, I'm sure you drove very cautiously, and that you don't feel guilty about you being the driver of that accident. It's just, so I call it actually seeding, that where I haven't considered that, now suddenly I consider that. Now I do things just make it 10 times worse. So again, the concept of mindfulness. And you know what, in mindfulness, that you can maybe just send a SMS to that person from time to time, because there's always a very big support system immediately after the death, before the funeral, But 7 days after that, the flowers are dead, and bit by bit, people tend to neglect a person in a grief situation. In my opinion, I think it takes about 2 years to recover from that. But I would say the first 3 months is the worst. So a little SMS to check in that will just say something like, not a question, like thinking of you. Cinema, somebody died the 3rd of August, that on the 3rd of September you'll send a SMS to say, I know it is a month, I hope you are coping. Things like, don't think that you're alone, we're here to support you in any kind of way. So those type of things where they feel that you are there, even if they don't lean on that support, or even if they don't answer that SMS back, it is always there for them to comfort, what we call the collective consciousness, to comfort, and that you feel, people feel your pain, and people have a compassion and a presence in terms of that. So examples of things not to say would be, this is part of God's plan. I think because that triggers people, it triggers people in a different way. I think it makes them angry, it makes them feel more misunderstood, even if it is part of God's plan. I said earlier that I think that the day that we are born and the day that we are we're going to die is in the rhythm of the universe. But to say that, I think is an insensitive thing to say. Things like, we have lots to be thankful for. A situation like, sure, my aunt had a worse situation, that this and this happened. So disregard that person's pain and that person's journey by sharing another traumatic story with them. I think can be emotionally cruel to somebody. Words like, it is behind you and life goes on. Yes, we know that, and that is exactly the problem, that I feel life goes on. I don't know how my life is going to go on and how I'm going to do it. So it caused people to close, and it caused them to feel misunderstood, and it caused them to withdraw even more. That sentence that says, he's in a better place now. I think in inner dialogue, that person will feel he's not in a better place because he should be with me, or my child should be with me. My child shouldn't be in a better place now. It's a very risky statement to make, and I think the person receiving that statement would easily feel would easily feel the let me rather not share what is my thinking about that, because if somebody else's thinking is that he's in a better place now, I think it gives people resentment towards the support. So that all these things are what we call secondary wounding, like the wound is there and it makes the wound just worse. Things like, you probably think that you're never going to heal. It's also an unkind statement, although it feels, the person would think that they're trying to support, because if they say to you, you think that you're never going to heal, it's almost a superimposition of what they feel already. So yes, I do feel I'm never going to heal. And then if somebody says, you probably think you're never going to heal, it makes it worse. And I think it creates a type of internal storm or panic inside of somebody. And then that statement that people make, where they say, sure, you look so strong. I always think, how must I look? Because I think if it was biblical times, I would have ash on my head all the time. So how must I look? And I think people have no idea of the journey. So that little bit of time when people can center themselves and they can function, and they can go to work, and they can do what they need to do. It doesn't mean that the grief is not impacted, or that it's not upmost in your mind all the time. But those few times where you can center yourself and just do what you need to do, And how do you answer the question if somebody says, sure, you look so much better now? Because it means that they can't see on the inside, and they can actually not see how intense is that pain, or how intense is that journey for the person. So I quickly want to just go through the stages of grief. So there are lots of psychologists and researchers that have tried to put grief in different stages, and I think every person have got their own opinion. But in my working and my practice and my experience, what I've done is I have put it into 6 stages. So the first stage is numbness, which means that immediately after it happened, numbness lasts about 2 hours. It's like I think it's a body's natural way to protect himself from the terrible shock of hearing something like that. So it's almost like you in a dream, or it is not true. And that numbness, I think, prevents immediate survival. Maybe in the same way they say that if somebody is shot by accident, initially you don't feel it, and maybe you just feel the wetness on the side of your leg, and then when you look, you see there's a bullet wound or something, and so that's the physical response. And I think that we also have an emotional response: numbness, disbelief. Disbelief is, it actually can't be true. I cannot believe this is a nightmare that I'm gonna wake up from. The disbelief that what I have heard, what the doctor has just said, or the telephone call that has just come through, that I can't believe that this is happening to me and happening in my life. Then denial, and denial would be, it can't be happening to me. So those two steps very close together, but that it can't be happening to me. And very often in that denial, people would go to the scene of an accident because they want to see the child on the side of the road passed away, or they want to go to the funeral parlor. They want to see that person. And so often people would say, I will only believe it if I see it. So that people want to do that. Then we go to anger, and the anger stage is all those questions of why, and sad for me always, because there's not one answer to that sentence of why. Why has God taken such a good person? Why is the world so cruel? Why did a drunk driver get in a car and killed my child? Why did I have to got infected with this virus and then infected somebody else? So anger is a wasteful emotion, because it uses up a lot of emotional energy, because it means that you're not embracing what is happening to you, and you have this internal rebellion about this, that it can't be. And there are so many bad people in the world. Why would God take such a good person, or such a kind person, or my only person? Some people have 4 children, and I only have 1 child, and God has taken my child. Then the 5th stage is bargaining, and bargaining would mean I will do absolutely everything to reverse this. I'll do everything if it just can't be true. A lady said to me in the office the other day, her boy died on a young boy, 17, died in a motorbike accident. And she said to me, Annale, if I can have my child for 1 more day, I will sacrifice the rest of my life, so I can die after that. If she's supposed to live for another 40 years, that she can say, I'm prepared to let go of 40 years of my life if I can just see my child 1 more day. Then we go into depression. Depression is the deep sadness that comes when the realization comes. So the further we are from the last time that we have seen that person, the deeper the yearning and the miss of that person becomes. So people become very sad, and so we call that a reactive depression. Reactive depression means linked to a specific event or incident. And then the last stage is acceptance. And like I said, I think that would take about 2 years. And acceptance would be that we have hope again, that you are going to be okay, and that we in our inner dialogue, in our inner talk, that you say to yourself, everything is going to be okay. And such a beautiful thing that I always think and say to people is that you can spend the rest of your life honoring that person, honoring what you've learned from the person, honoring the core values that you acquired in your relationship with that people or person. Carry on with a cause that person had, or a belief that person had. So you can spend your life honoring that person, lighting a candle on the birthday, lighting a candle at a Christmas table or a family table, where people have the opportunity to feel the presence of that person physically in honoring them. And then I just want to add something here, you know, that pain is the catalyst to growth. And it is like gold. If gold is in a furnace and it burns for 2 hours, it burns to 9 karat gold. And if it burns for 4 hours, it burns to 18 karat gold. And it burns for 10 hours, it burns to 24 karat gold, pure gold. So sometimes if we can repattern and redefine pain like that, to say there is a purifying process in pain, and that we split the pain and the learning, and that we keep the learning, and that we know that pain is part of life. Life starts with pain, and very often it ends with pain, and that the pain that you're going through is almost burning in purity in your own personal growth and in your own psyche, in the person that you are. So after the incident of loss, now we talk about a month or 2 afterwards. A process should happen that we call the redefining of self. I need to define myself now as a person without a child, or a person without a partner, or without a parent, because that life-changing event has changed your life completely. So you need to recalibrate, redefine yourself, and recenter yourself, because the last thing that the person who passed away would have wanted is for you yourself to have no life, value of life, no life, that you fall apart, that you live in pain, that you live in emotional distress, that there's no joy ever in your life. That's the last thing that I think that person would have wished for you. In my practice, I always say to them, if your husband would have been with us now and sitting on that opposite chair, what do you think would have been the advice that he would give to you now? Or a parent, what would be the advice that he would give to you now? And it's an interesting thing where you just objectify it a little bit and make people aware of doing it differently. Saying, okay, I still have life, and let me have the value of life, and let me live my life to capacity, in the best version of myself and of what I can do. So in the recentering of self, I said, embrace the process. It is one day at a time. Even if somebody asks me, how are you doing? That I can say one day at a time. Because how do I even answer that question? And for some people, we don't necessarily want to give like a deep emotional question, and to other people, there's a level of tiredness in you in terms of expressing what is happening on your inside. So embrace the process, one day at a time. I think it is important for us to do certain rituals. I spoke earlier about lighting a candle, planting a beautiful tree, having a plaque with a person's name and the date of birth and the date of passing, that there's a place that you can go to honor that person, see how the tree grows, a ritual of taking ashes and putting it in the sea, maybe throw a beautiful bunch of white roses after it. It's a ritual what we need to do. I think in ancient times there were lots of rituals and after death, and those rituals is almost like you're taking ownership of that death and doing something to make the non-presence of somebody present again and doing something. So internal regulation, actually, any problem-solving skill would go on two things. So make it relevant to grief, but you make it relevant to any problem in your life, and that would be the concept of intellectualization and normalization. Now, normalization would mean in your inner dialogue, because we have to have a wholesome and a healthy relationship with ourselves in managing ourselves physically, managing ourselves emotionally, and our general mental health. So normalization means that in your inner dialogue and how you speak to yourself, that you can say, any person in my circumstance will feel so distressed, will feel I actually can't go on, will feel my heart is absolutely broken. How do I just face the next day? So if you normalize what it is, what you are going through, it relieves that intrapsychic pressure to say, this is what we go through as humans, and this is what everybody will feel. So let me take a breath and be okay. It is to be expected, because this is the process, and that is how it is. Even with a divorce or a breakup of a relationship, that you normalize that, and that you can say, of course I feel like that, because I committed my life and my everything to this person that has abandoned me, or that has hurt me so much. So the normalization concept is a very, very important concept in emotional intelligence. And the second thing is intellectualization. Intellectualization means that I understand on an intellectual level what is happening to me and why I react like that. So those two things, normalization, intellectualization, help you. So if you understand on an intellectual level what is happening, you can manage the process better, and you can manage yourself better, and you can do some reading on grief, or some reading on a divorce, some reading on what does it mean to lose a child? What does it mean to lose a parent? I mean, you lose both parents, and then despite the fact that you're 40 years old, you feel like an orphan. So that you understand what is happening on your inside. So with anything, those two things, fundamentals in the recalibrating of self and the redefining of self, in my opinion. And I said earlier, after somebody that you love has passed away, you can spend the rest of your life honoring that person, and have that as a type motto deep inside. Like a child who loses a parent, like when you have a baby yourself, that you give it your parent's name, or carry on with a cause that your parent was interested in, or your partner was interested in, be that nature conservation, animal protection, working in a soup kitchen, doing something and reframing the painful thing into a constructive thing of purpose. Because after intense pain, or after loss or death, I think people feel that they've lost a purpose, that you do something actively and constructively to re-establish purpose in your life. And then, it's like climbing Mount Everest. I mean, how do you climb Mount Everest? One step at a time. So that's what you do, like one step at a time. And sometimes, it's very sore that you can survive just from 8 o'clock in the morning till 12, and then from 12 to 4, and from 4 to 8. And in an inner dialogue that we have, because even though the person has passed away has passed away, it doesn't mean that that person isn't still a present in my life. And then a motto that I think that we can have that is very helpful is that you can say, quote, "Thank you for have lived and for the impact you have had on my life." I mean, how beautiful is that? Thank you for having lived and the impact you had on my life. And that is how we keep that person alive, despite the fact that that person has passed away and is not in our life anymore. Before my talk, Bridget asked me to just two quick questions that I just want to go through before we go to a full Q&A. So I said mentally healthy workers are more productive workers and are more present workers. So if we look at the type of behavior that we can expect in the work situation where there has been a situation of loss or grief, and you know what, it's not only just the family members, you know, it's colleagues that worked closely together, that formed friendships and that loved each other, and then you have to go into the office again and see that empty desk with a favorite coffee cup standing there. It is just heartbreaking. So the type of behavior that we can expect after somebody has been exposed to grief or losing a loved one, and like I said before, all behaviors are different because personalities are different. So people deal with it in different way. Is anxiety. That anxiety is rooted in, I'm not going to be okay. What is going to happen to me? Anxiety, depression, lack of concentration, emotional withdrawal, because I said grief is lonely. And then I think lack of optimal performance. And the lack of optimal performance is not something I think to be concerned about, because it is situational stress. It will recover again. It's just in the moment to do it's just in the moment where somebody feel that I'm a comrades athlete and I can run 90 kilometers, but I feel I can't even run one now because you feel so depleted because of the pain and the emotional distress. So in terms of manager support, this is something that I got from the internet, University of Nebraska, I think, where they talk about, they give five points. I'm just going to read that quickly. Firstly, they say ensure that the bereaved person know that work is not a priority at the moment. It'll become a priority again, but it's not a priority at the moment. Ask how they want to be supported in terms of how do they want to stay in contact? Do they want everybody to contact them? Do they just want one specific person to contact them, that they don't get all the SMSs in their box? Thirdly, that the company can say, how do you want us to stay in contact? Do you want to come to your house and visit? Do you want to come to the office? So let them direct a little bit in terms of their own needs in the moment. I also think the fourth thing is a very important thing, where they talk about direct them to support systems that are available and the importance of self-care. So a support system could be like an allocated person at work that will do that support to that person. There's also programs that companies have called ICAS, and ICAS is then you can make an appointment free of charge with a psychologist working for ICAS. I think they donate 4 or 5 sessions, or then to a psychologist working with grief, specializing in grief, or somebody that you feel comfortable with speaking to. And I definitely think that to speak to a therapist after you have been exposed to a grief situation, I think is fundamentally important. It's like if I've broken an arm, that immediately afterwards that it is correct when it starts healing, that it doesn't start healing incorrectly, and that we don't have that that you're not defined through pain. And I always say let's deal with it. Let me deal with it from my strength, not my weakness. Even the little bit of strength I have left. And the last thing this article said, they say they keep the dialogue open and review the situation frequently. It's quite important, you know, that because it changes. It's a fluid process, because it's better than not. So keep that dialogue open. For managers, then, that was the second question that Bridget asked. I think that it is important that we, for managers supporting people in grief or supporting people in the workplace, that we talk about the work, talk about the challenges, and talk about the additional challenges. Because I said to you earlier, I think it's like situational stress, and situational stress brings all the additional challenges, and that we open the dialogue to say, but what can I do to make it better? Such a profound sentence. What can I do to make it better? So I also think that managers must remember that the long-term capacity is not destroyed only because we have got short-term goals. So if we can just manage it automatically, I think things will stabilize and things will get better. That famous, beautiful sentence that says, "This too shall pass." I think that managers should review and adopt goals with the team. Review the goal, adopt it accordingly, review it again, adopt it accordingly. And that we can look that the goals is realistic, that the goals are practical, that it is achievable, and that it is relevant for this situation, for now, because it won't always be like this. It is just for now. And then my last opinion here, I want to say, if there's compassion in a work situation, and workers feel that managers care about them and care about their well-being, and that they're not only just a tool to achieve something, to make money for somebody else, but it is about them personally, I do think that wins the loyalty of the team. And that long after the intensity of this world pandemic and the trauma that we are experiencing in South Africa, long after that is done, that you still have that loyalty of that people, because happy people, happy workers are good workers, and that's what we want to achieve, where they feel that there's real care and it's like a humane environment that they work in. And I think doing that in a time when somebody really needs support is the long-term benefit what the company has because of that input, what they have earlier, is that you can't even put a price to that. And also the workers around the person who is in a bereaved situation can see the compassion and the care that comes from management, and that gives them a reciprocal loyalty, and that we can take a breath, and that we can say one day at a time, and it won't always be so difficult, and that this too shall pass, and that we can then go into normalizing the work situation again, because we have to remember, in the midst of everything, it is hard and it is difficult, but that we can be brave, take a breath, and do what we need. So that is my thoughts that I'd gladly share with you. And if there is any questions that you want to ask Bridget, or was there something that you want to put to me, or anybody with a specific question, they are welcome to do that. Bridget?
Okay, I put the camera on, but not the microphone. Folks, I was just saying, if you do have any questions to ask, please put them in the control panel bar on the side, and we'll share those with Annale. In the meantime, I have one comment, and then I have a couple of questions. I just think it's interesting. We speak about, Annale, about food safety culture a lot in the industry and particularly in our business. And I think it's just interesting because you touched on this, you know, on having compassion in a workplace. And for me, I think sort of, and you also spoke about normalization, you know, how you make grief normal in a space like this, which is not necessarily, I think, something that we've had to deal with on this level before. And I think it might be an interesting task for us to do as part of our company culture, is to look at how we normalize grief, trauma, because this pandemic is not going away anytime soon. And, you know, so maybe as a company culture, if we could look at adding compassion to one of the values that we actually implement with our staff and with our team members, you know, if we look at that sort of openness about talking about pain and talking about grief, I think that could go a long way to making it something that it's easier for us to deal with in the workplace, that people feel safe enough to, because it is about safety. You know, this is to talk about grief. You do need a safe space. I have to say, your presentation was spot on. I lost my son a few years ago, and to everybody watching, I just have to say that I can validate the content that Annale had shared today. It is very relevant and it's very true. And I think taking it out of the home space and into the workspace is kind of like our new normal in a sense. Annale, the one question I wanted to ask you, so, you know, we've spoken about death as, you know, obviously that's obviously the main source of grief, but is there a sense where, say I haven't lost anybody, say I've been lucky enough to have not lost anybody through COVID or anything, am I right in saying that there's a sense of almost like corporate grief and corporate trauma just through being in this pandemic, just through our whole lives being upside down and not knowing what the future holds? Is that something that people could be seeing in their staff above and beyond the specific instances of loss?
Very good question, Bridget, and it's so true. So we call that anticipated grief, which means that the grief hasn't come to me yet, and I'm not exposed to it yet, but I anticipate that, because what if I get sick? What if my parent gets sick? What if my partner gets sick? So it is like an unnatural level of alertness that I think that happens because of the pandemic. The second thing is also regarding work security, that we don't know when things can go very haywire, or a company need to retrench people, and that is that collective consciousness that I spoke about before, that it is not only when I've lost somebody, but it feels to me there's a painful situation in our country collectively at the moment. I mean, I can say to you that in the practice in 33 years that I've been doing it, I have never seen the level of acute emotional distress, anxiety, depression, fear, all those things, even if somebody hasn't been exposed specifically to a loss situation. I think that general level of insecurity, yet humans struggle. There are two things that humans struggle with tremendously. So the one is inconsistency and unpredictability, and COVID is both.
So how do we talk about that in the workplace? I mean, as management, should we speak about that in an anticipatory sense? You know, perhaps you're feeling like this and like that.
Well, I think it's a very good thing for general good communication between people. You know, that there's like a check-in session. It can be 10 minutes, a check-in session per week in terms of how you're coping, how you're doing, what is happening in your life, what have you experienced. That's that mindfulness, and that's that level of care, where the discussion is not only about figures and achievable goals, whatever, but also about the emotional stance of people. And I do think it will be a very good thing to have a check-in, maybe a manager with a little group, the person above the manager with 5 or so managers, and have that level of check-in just to bring a emotional and a care component into the reality of the business world.
Okay, so to have that filter down through all the structures, so put something tangible in place where you sort of consciously checking in on people, and giving them a platform to sort of say, actually, I know I'm not coping. I'm really anxious at the moment. Okay.
Yes, 100%, definitely.
Okay, I see we're running out of time, but I'm just going to ask you. You spoke about some really helpful programs in terms of, maybe having a person who can do counselling at the office, potentially somebody, I don't know, in the HR department, or somebody who has some sort of insight into that. You spoke about, was it ICAS? I think we'd like to maybe put those details up afterwards for people. What other systems? I know for me personally, concentration and memory was a big one in a time of anxiety and grief. How do you reckon that we can manage that in the workplace, in terms of, because obviously life does still have to go on. You do still have to go to work, even though you are just in a space where you're not necessarily performing at your optimal. How do we help our people to function through that to the place where they do return to that optimal space?
So not all companies are registered with ICAS, so that is one option. But the other option is to point them into the direction of a therapist that can help them. There is a website called Therapist Directory, and that gives you a picture of the therapist and the therapist experience and the area in which they work. So that is an option to do. But you know what? I think maybe a 1 or 2 hour workshop, I think that is something that companies can invest in. Maybe having a 1 or 2 hour workshop with a therapist specifically dealing with some of the managers. And then the manager is going to have their little workshops with the people on that triangle, how it saves down. I do think the financial investment, the small financial investment in having somebody to present either a debriefing session or a little talk or a coping strategy session in the workplace is very helpful.
And I think it goes back to what you said about, the company making people realize that, you're not just a means to an end. You're not just a tool for me to make money from, but you actually have value as a person, and this company does actually care about your well-being. I think that messaging goes a long way, like you spoke about loyalty, but I think more than ever we've seen the fragility of life in the last 18 months, and the needs, even as a workplace, to communicate that to people that you matter, that we care for you, and you're more than just a number in this machine. We're not just here to produce food or to do whatever we do, but you're actually here, and you have value above what you do. I think that's really a good takeaway to come out of today.
Absolutely, it's like planting a tree now, and I can have the benefit of the fruit or the shade later, and that's the investment in people now. And like I said earlier, it's not only just. I think if people in the company, employees, can see how the company support and have compassion for somebody who's gone through something, it gives them a type of calmness in themselves that. With that anticipated grief, what I've said before, that if something goes wrong with me, that they will be there for me too, and they'll protect me too, and stand by me too, compassion for me too in a situation. And then people feel emotionally safe, and when they feel emotionally safe, you have the best of them in your company.
And their energy is not going towards the anxiety, their energy is then going towards, you know, the activities that they should actually, you know, that they need to be getting on with in the day. That's a really good point. Annale, our time is up, but I could talk to you for another hour. This has been such a powerful and such a valuable time together. Thank you for sharing your time to be with us and to share your knowledge and your experience. We do really appreciate that. Folks, the recording will be available on our website afterwards, as always, and we'll put Annale's contact details. If anybody does need to contact her in terms of anything further, we'll make that available to you. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is, it's just so encouraging to see that there are so many businesses out there who recognize the need for this type of intervention, you know, and the need to look at the workplace differently. I think if anything, 2020 and 2021 have shown us that life has to be different. We have to tackle it differently. So thank you for sharing some of those tools that just gave us a bit of insight into how we start that process. We do appreciate it, Annale.
Thank you very much. It was my absolute pleasure. And everybody have a nice and a gentle day.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cheers, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll chat again soon.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.